From E.P.N, this is Your World Discovered. My name is David Ewen, and my guest today is Sarah Buhrman. She is the author of Too Wyrd and has been writing many years. With a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at the world, her form of story and verse is blunt and witty. Her book, Too Wyrd, is an urban fantasy and book number 1 in the Runespells series. Let's first welcome Sarah. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, before we actually talk about the book, let's talk about the series. Now, some people who might look at it online, let me go back to it. We were just fixing our slide, but I know on Amazon, the Runespells series, it does not have that S at the end. So we'll let our viewing audience know that it's Runespells with an S at the end series. Can you tell us a little bit about what that series is being developed into?
Well, the inspiration actually came from reading the Havamal, which is one of the main texts of Norse mythology. And in it, it describes the 18 spells that Odin received in exchange for his eye, which is why he only has one eye. And I thought, wouldn't it be fabulous if naughty, naughty people could get control of these spells and make much, much havoc with this? And that's pretty much where it came from. I decided that they should be a physical form that humans could use, and that there was an overarching plot to start Ragnarok. And then you have this poor Nicola, the main character, who gets caught up in this crazy situation that she really has no desire to be involved in. But she's the one who gets picked, so there you go.
Now, we were talking about this is a new series coming out, and again, it's called Too Wyrd, and it's your urban fantasy and book number 1 in the Runespells series. It was just released about not far from the time of the airing of this program. Too Wyrd. Tell us a little bit about what this urban fantasy is all about.
Well, it's the story of Nicola getting involved in this situation. She is essentially summoned to Indianapolis to try and find her stepsister, who has gone missing and may or may not be involved in a cult, which also just happens to be run by Nicola's ex. So she decides to go in and try and save her stepsister, which has been kind of her life policy, is to save her sister. And when she gets there, she realizes that this is way bigger than she had anticipated. The things that she blew off as being just, people telling stories turned out to be dead true, and then some. And so she has to go around figuring out what is going on, running away from monsters in dark alleys, and just in general trying to figure out how to survive while being given this task of retrieving these little pendants that represent the Runespells.
Now, these pendants are called the Runespells, and that's what the name of the series is, the Runespells. And the way you described the book, you were really describing a lot with the characters. So which came first in the development? It's different for every writer, but it looks like there was a lot of character development, meaning I'm going to write a story about these characters, so I have to come up with these characters first. Could you tell us a little bit about how the book was put together, and is my understanding correct? Did the characters come first and then the story develop upon them?
Actually, it was the exact opposite. The plot was the first thing that I developed. And when I started writing it, these characters came full force right to the front and said, well, yes, you have a really great plot, but we're going to run the story. So it turned out very well that way, because it's a good plot, but the story itself is very much driven by these characters and their interactions with each other, and just the way that they deal with these situations. So the plot was essentially me throwing situations at these characters and then going, okay, what are they going to do now? So I think it turned out very well as a character-driven plot that didn't come character first.
Now, we talked about in our introduction your style of writing, and I'm just going to go back to that. You're the author of Too Wyrd, and it's written in a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at the world. So tell us about a little bit more of that style of writing and how that appeals to the reading audience.
Well, Nicola is incredibly fluent in both English and sarcasm, and it gets her into quite a bit of trouble. She actually gets involved in sort of a nemesis of hers from Indianapolis decides to try and scare her off by accusing her of being involved in a cold case murder. So this detective starts coming after her, asking all of these questions, and she kind of gets in a little trouble because she just cannot control the sarcastic remarks. And that kind of shapes the way that she interacts with all of these characters. Everything's just a bunch of one-liners that she shoots back and forth with people. It's a lot of banter, the way that she talks to people, and it really develops the way that her character looks at the world. It's a very almost jaded but still with a sense of humor kind of way of looking at things, where she knows what's going on. She's not going to let it get too much to her, but she will rip people apart with the sharp side of her tongue. And that actually turns out to be her major weapon in all of this is her intellect and her ability to talk her way out of situations.
Is it a good way to describe the book that it also has, you talk about the sarcasm and the zingers, if I may call it that, and the one-liners, as you called it that. Is it fair to say that we could just simply say it also has a very nice sense of humor to it?
It does. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's comedic at all, but I've had several people come back after reading it and say, I loved this scene and this scene because I was laughing the whole time. Even though the topic may have been relatively serious that they were discussing, just the constant interaction. At one point, Nicola is asking about the nature of spirits and like creatures. And so she decides that at one point in time during this conversation, she is going to ask about Santa Claus. Just things like that where, she's like, oh man, I'm going to ask about Santa Claus. And then she does, of course. So, just this kind of wry snark about her that makes it extremely funny to go through the dialogue on these.
Now, you'll certainly have an opportunity to develop this character, and of course the other characters in the book as well. Too Wyrd, and Wyrd is spelled W-Y-R-D. The book Too Wyrd is book number 1 of the Runespells series, I should say. Is there a set number of books for the series, or is this something that you plan to have go on and develop a life on its own?
Well, because the overall plot is based around these the finite number of these spells, there are 18 of them. I actually did go through and plot out the entire series as an overall, just a very general 1 or 2 liners for each one, figuring out which spells would go together and what the overall idea would be behind the book. And so there's going to be 9 of them. Obviously, if the characters take it in an incredibly odd direction, that could change, but I don't really foresee that. So I'm planning on the 9.
Now, prior to the 9 being developed, or at least the first book, which is Too Weird, which is book number 1 of the Runespells series, of the anticipated 9-book series, you have been writing for many years. Tell us a little bit about your earlier writing.
Oh, it's I started writing fiction at 8 years old. I think I finished my first book around 17, and it's all horrible. It's so horrible. I had all of the ambition and very, very little of the skill at that point. So I've been getting published for short stories and poetry essentially since I was 18, 19 years old. So, and that's kind of been my driving force is the short stories, and the little publications that say, hey, somebody actually likes it. But this is kind of my great big milestone in that it's the first full-length fiction that I've put out, and so it's probably going to hold a special place in my heart for the rest of my life for that.
So that being said, that's what I was going to ask you. The Runespell series is certainly something that is much different and much more pronounced, if you will, than anything you've done before. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, a lot of what I've put out before has been, I really like to write horror stories as shorts. I've been published in a few places with those. Some science fiction as short stories, and I've put out some nonfiction as both essays and full lengths. Yes, this is the first full length fiction, so it is quite special to me.
Now that the book has been out, and I believe if I saw on Amazon the release date was September 8th. It may have been a different date, but I believe that was the release date. What are some people saying about your book?
Well, I did have a few beta readers who put reviews up already, and I believe I have another review. Quite frankly, it's been a massively positive response. Either people are absolutely thrilled that they can buy it, or they've read it and now they get to keep it, as a print book, things like that. I'm really happy with how very positive the feedback has been so far. Like you said, it was the 8th, so it's been a little bit over a week so far. Not many people have had a chance to even receive the book yet, so still waiting on getting more feedback, but I've had a lot of really positive responses for it.
Now, as this is your newest milestone, as you had mentioned before, because this is the first time you're doing a full-length feature book, again, it's Too Weird from the Runespells series with the anticipated 9-book series coming out. Book 1 just released September 8th of 2016. What do you expect for yourself as a writer to give your readers using this book?
That's I would love to give them a book that they can't put down. I would love to give them a world that makes them feel better, that strikes a chord with them, characters that they can identify with. A lot of my characters are a bit outside of the mainstream for, even urban fantasy. And an understanding of Norse mythology and the Asatru religion as it works, and just a new perspective on how certain things may be, maybe a new way of looking at how the world works and the secret little things that underlie everything. So just really, as long as I give somebody something to think about, I'm perfectly happy.
So that being said, what will you do to make that more pronounced when you do book number 2 in the Runespells series?
Ooh, well, one of the big things that Nicola deals with is a sort of a deep insecurity about her own abilities. And so with book 2, I'm actually going to be playing on that quite a bit, where she actually ends up going undercover to a healing commune that turns out to be a massive brainwashing type of cult that totally gets to her, and she has to find some way to struggle through that, where she's literally going to be pulled into this mindset, and she has to figure out how to tap into her own strength and her own confidence to get through that. And I plan on continuing that overall theme throughout the series, building on the various things that happen to her, but really dealing with finding one's own strength and the emotional strength that one gets from close-knit friends and family, from having the community that really means something, and things like that. So
what you had just described as you were giving that description, I was going to ask you, tell us a little bit about how this book, I know it's urban fantasy, but you were just describing some elements that fit in line with a real-life world. And that being said, it gives some sort of realism and reality, even though it's an urban fantasy, but it helps the readers connect. Tell us a little bit about the realism that you portray in the book so that readers can connect to the fantasy that you are creating on a canvas, on the page, if you will.
Really tried to make it as it's a fantasy, but as real-ish as possible. There are spells, there are magic, there are these, and yet there are reasons that it doesn't change the world into something nice. There's behind it. There's subtlety behind it, and emotional impact. The things that Nicola does, psychs of the things that she does. She with trying to figure out if her magical abilities is just her being crazy. That seems to be the core of her needs. I think that the makes truly different is that a superhero. She is with these that
looks like we have a little bit of a connection problem, but while we're working on that connection problem, just want to share with you who my guest is today. Today we have Sarah Buhrman. She's the author of Too Wyrd, and she has been writing for many years, and this is her first full-length urban fantasy that she's come out with, and it's for an anticipated 9-book series called Urban Fantasy, with a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at the world. Her form of story and verse is blunt and witty. Again, Too Wyrd as an urban fantasy, and is book 1 in the Runespells series, and this again is book 1 out of an anticipated 9 books. let's go back to Sarah Buhrman. And Sarah, let's take a look at some of the other projects you've been working on. We were talking before we went on air. You have a show on Blog Talk Radio. This is an opportunity where people can get to know more about you and the other things that you do. Could you tell us a little bit about your Blog Talk Radio series?
Well, I am one of the main co-hosts for the Pagan Musings podcast. That is on the Pagan Musings channel. Some of the other shows that we have are Pagan Weekly News. Both of those are weekly shows that I co-host. We also have the pleasure of hosting the Green Egg Magazine radio show. And so we enjoy having them with us. I have a blog and Twitter and website all under the name Author Goddess. So going for a little branding there, make it easy to find me. I'm on Goodreads. I'm on Facebook, all over the place. Pretty easy to find if you try. So I frequently go by the handle Kali Sarah for the radio show and for a few things on some of the websites that I frequent. So.
Now, what is your advice for a writer if they wanted to get into urban fantasy or writing in general? You've done a variety of things. What advice would you give a new writer trying to become an author?
Practice, read, and make sure that you research the industry. I'd say one of the biggest things that I'm constantly talking people through is the shock of the reality of the money. A lot of people think that you immediately become rich and famous, and it doesn't quite work that way. Sometimes, but not often. So, I like to make sure that people understand that there's a certain amount of realisticness that they need to understand if they're going to get involved in writing. Not that it should stop them at all, but don't quit your day job quite yet. So, yeah, and again, read in the genres that you want to write in, read in the genres that you don't want to write in, read in the genres that, read everything. Just read everything and practice the writing.
Now we're talking about your book again, which is Too Wyrd, which is book number 1 of the Runespells series. Am I a little early in asking you when book number 2 will be either started or completed, or what's the timeline for the series in terms of its release?
Well, this time of year is quite busy for me, so I do have it started. And I do have the full outline done, so once I actually get time to sit down and write it, it should go pretty quickly. I'm actually planning on doing the second book as my NaNoWriMo project for this year. And that's kind of where Too Wyrd came from, was last year's NaNoWriMo. And if all goes well, then hopefully it will be sometime spring that I will have the second book out. So crossing fingers on that. That my house doesn't blow up or the children don't die or something like that.
Now, again, we're talking about Too Wyrd for the Runespells theory. I keep saying theories. It's the Runespell series. And the book is out now. And let me get the information on that as we had before. Too Wyrd is the book. It's an urban fantasy, and this is book 1 in the Runespells series. At this time, I want to thank Sarah Buhrman. Thank you so much for joining me on Your World Discovered.
Thank you.
This is Your World Discovered. My guest today has been Sarah Buhrman. She is the author of Too Wyrd, which is the first book of the Runespells series. See, I said it correct. And the series is anticipated to be 9 books. Again, this is Your World Discovered. My name is David Ewen, and this is E.P.N.